Kraven the Hunter is a movie that I don't really think a lot of people went into with real optimism to think that was ever going to be a good film. I think it's very obvious from a lot of the Sony Spider-Man universe movies, they've not been received very well. Pretty much I've watched all of them, and practically all of them until Kraven the Hunter have been, well, bad. I mean, maybe Venom the Last Dance and maybe some of the Venom movies were probably a little bit better than like movies say Morbius and Madam Web, which are just absolutely abysmal in so many ways. I think Venom does a little bit better with like some action sequences and some acting performances. So going into Kraven the Hunter, I didn't really go into it with much enthusiasm, and I really didn't really think that it was going to exceed my expectations. However, so far this movie hasn't got to the best of starts. So far it's being slaughtered by the critics. It's been getting like really low scores across the board. But I think the audience do see a little bit more positivity with this movie, and it's kind of gotten high scores. So at the moment, this movie, I would say for the most part, from a critical reception, is not great. The audience probably has a different view of it. I mean, I don't know what the view could be. Maybe people kind of expected it to be a fun, bad movie, or maybe there were some elements of this film that could be good. Spoiler warning, I'm going to give you my thoughts immediately, and to no surprise, this movie is bad. However, I don't really think every single aspect of this movie is bad, so I want to kind of give you like the compliments of this movie. For once, I think out of all the Sony Spider-Man universe, I think the action sequences in this movie is probably the best in terms of its production and its choreograph. I actually think they did a good job with it. There was like some really sort of gross self-aware scenes that they kind of got into very well. And I think for some of the action, especially some of the fight sequences, they actually did a good job. Also, I will say, I think for a lot of the actors as well, their performances, it was fine. I'm not going to really kind of say it was horrendous or terrible or very good. But I do think Aaron Taylor Johnson, who portrays Kraven the Hunter, actually did a good job portraying the role. I think he does enjoy the role because there were certain parts of the screenplay and the movie that he does feel like he's in his moment and tries to kind of portray the character in a fun way as well. So it wasn't like all the time he was always playing Kraven to be serious as an anti-hero or anything like that. Although there are like some scenes where you do take him seriously. But there was also like some moments where he was just having fun with the role. And I think it's fine. And I don't really think that's really much you could really criticize with that. And I think it was not as bad as like, say, other movies. I think his performance is kind of like the similar on par with Tom Hardy's role as Eddie Brock. So I think the acting performances, especially from Aaron Taylor Johnson, was good in that respect. And as far as positives go, that's practically where it ends. So I'm now going to get into the nitty gritty parts of the movie, and its majority of it is stuff I don't like. So the first part of the movie I don't like is the story. I don't really think that's really a surprise considering most of the other Sony Spider-Man universe films haven't really built up a story. And this movie is really no different. I mean, there's no real way how it sets the scene. And unfortunately as well, like for most of the characters in this film, they practically have little to no development that you actually ever feel invested in their characters or their story. And they don't really try and put any effort into doing that. So that's really like one aspect of the film I don't like is the story. And every single time you go through the screenplay and the pacing of this movie, trying to somehow follow whether a story does happen, you never really seem like it ever does happen or really anything happens for any reason. So that's like one thing I really do have to criticize about this film. Now, part of the story I'm going to give you is also another issue I have is the writing. So I'm going to kind of give you like a sense of like what I kind of took from it. So the movie really starts the scene with Sergey, who has a family. He has his brother called Dmitri, and also his father, who's also played by Russell Crowe. So Sergey, who is Kraven the Hunter, they essentially him and his family do trophy hunting. So they hunt in the wild to kill wild animals. So when Sergey and Dmitri see a lion, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't show like any threat or any violence at all. They just stand off, and this is part of like where the writing becomes so silly. So this is part of like where how Sergey becomes Kraven the Hunter. So essentially, what happens is so Sergey approaches the lion. Dmitri doesn't do anything. They don't want to shoot the lion. And it's very just territorial. And all of a sudden, his father just comes and shoots the lion, and then the lion attacks Sergey. It's such a weird way of how this whole thing happened. And ever since that's happened, Kraven doesn't have like a good relationship with his father. They have a very sort of in and out relationship, which a lot of the times it doesn't really ever feel that way. So, and then whenever you try and understand the writing direction of how things happen, it happens for stupid reason. So, clearly, when you see that incident happened, when the lion attacks Sergey or Kraven, all of a sudden the father blames him for the incident, saying, "Oh, you could have got yourself killed. Why didn't you shoot the lion?" It's like, well, you shot the lion, it reacted and it got angry and it attacked your son, and he's like blaming him for it. It just is such a weird way of how they written this movie. I know I'm kind of spoiling it, but I couldn't get that thought out of my head. Like literally, just the way the writing just sort of portrayed itself. But yeah, I'm kind of like explaining like just very small glimpse of the aspects of some of the scenes of this film to say. Now I know it's kind of spoiling the film a little bit, but I don't really think like many people will take interest in this film. But most of the time, like some of the writing just comes across like really cringe and it's too silly to be taken seriously. So that's really like a lot of things that really happen in this movie. There's also a woman that gets involved called Calypso. Her mother is essentially got like this antidote that kind of brings people back up. So that was kind of used to help Kraven to bring himself back up again, following the incident where he got like mauled by a lion per se, and then he has like this sort of blood transfusion like from or reaction from it, and then he develops like these superhero powers where he literally has like sharp vision and could just see things, you know, that humans can't see, and he has like all the like fast agility sequences as well to help his speed and agility. So that's kind of like the whole idea of like what his powers are. Now I do think it's not as like bad as like you think it will be. I think they do use it in a way that does work in some good action sequences, like I said. But the other problem I have as well is that some of the action sequences you don't really care for so much. And there's lots of characters and sequences that he will get involved in a battle with. Now they do have the Rhino in this movie as like another sort of anti-hero against him, like a villain. But like you never really understand his character or what he's really trying to do to attack him in the first place, or what like his connections is. Like I feel most throughout this movie, his Kraven's disconnect is mostly his father because of the incident that happened, and his father nearly killed him in a hunting matter, and then all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, Kraven goes and attacks the Rhino for whatever the story goes to. I think like there was like one scene where the Rhino and his crew just somehow tried to trespass onto his land, and it somehow upset him, and it kind of just went along from that point. It's just everything from that perspective just didn't really feel right. And I think that's the biggest problem. The movie doesn't really give opportunities for a lot of characters to really show any development. So you don't really care for like a lot of action sequences that happen or anything from it, because the story doesn't really help, and the screenplay doesn't really allow it to really make you excited or anticipated for these moments to happen. But in general, I'm kind of elaborating a little bit too much, mostly about my criticisms of this movie. But also, I'm going to kind of give you the summary like a little bit condensed. Like, it's not a good film. Like, it's very boring. The screenplay is jarring at times. Also, I have to say, like, a lot of the CGI as well just felt so animated and just so fake to be considered like a real live action. It really just, a lot of issues with this film do come across. Now, I don't think this is like the worst of the Sony Spider-Man universe movies. Like, I think that list alone really goes along with Morbius and Madam Web as the worst. I think this one kind of sits in this sort of bad level that's not exactly, abominable trash, essentially, where I think this kind of sits where the Venom movies do sit. So I don't really think you're going to really like hate this movie so much or go into it with the full expectations like this is going to be the worst film you'll see. That's not the case with Kraven the Hunter. And I do think parts of the critics do, I think, over-hate this movie a little bit. It wasn't as awful as I thought it was. So I don't really think that you could really hate this movie so much. I do praise it for some points, like some of the action sequences and some of the acting. But the other parts, story, screenplay, writing, directing, terrible. But also, I just want to say as well, this was also the last movie to conclude the Sony Spider-Man universe movies. And there's no plans that they're going to be doing any other films moving forward. And what I would say for this, I don't think this was like the worst send-off for it. But I think in general, these whole films have been nothing short of a disaster. Like, nearly every single one of them. So, yeah, I don't know what their plan will be moving forward. Whether all of a sudden, like, Sony and Marvel will do some collaborative work. Maybe like what they do for the Spider-Man movies and try and integrate those characters into that. I don't know. But all I can say is that these movies are not good in anything that they will try and do. Or actually try and connect themselves to Spider-Man at all. Like, none of them connect to Spider-Man in any attempt at all. It's actually really bad. But yeah, I do think this movie is over-hated by the critics. I do think the reception from the audience is a little bit of an exaggeration from my liking. But I will let you decide on what you would think of this movie. But yeah, let me know what you think of Kraven the Hunter. Let me know what you think about it. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe. Dislike if you want to dislike. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, that's about it. See you later.